Concerned about an issue in your life? Need some legal direction? You've come to the right place. Welcome to 5-Minute Legal Insights, a podcast that features top lawyers from across the country and delivers bite-sized moments of pure gold, so you can benefit from years of legal know-how in just minutes. Each week, we bring you the things that make the big difference, so you know how to approach your legal situation with confidence and clarity. Now, here's your host and founder of the law firm Authority Network, Grant Eagle.
Welcome to the show today, everybody. On the show today, we have Edward R. LaRue. He's a criminal attorney in Cleveland, focusing on sex crime defense. Welcome to the show, Ed.
Hello, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Now, in terms of sex crime, one of the things we talked about off camera was the rise in sex crime. And I wanted to ask you before we get into this, what you would put that down to. And do you think sex crimes are on the rise, or do you just think accusations are?
I think there's kind of two things going on here, Mr. Eagle. First of all, there is a greater scrutiny of cases and accusations than there's ever been to evaluate whether there's anything that could potentially be prosecuted by law enforcement, such that in the past, a lot of times, unless there was some sort of physical evidence or something that would back the word of the accuser, oftentimes the case would simply die right then and there. But now there's a greater scrutiny by the law enforcement to try to make cases.
Why do you think that is?
And I think that's in part because of things like the Me Too movement, as well as I think in part also the social media connections and those platforms out there that have been sort of in the last 10 years transformed a lot of the ways that people now meet each other, particularly in the dating context. And where, while it would seem to the user oftentimes that they are on an equal sort of field in the social media context, in fact, oftentimes the parties involved have very different views on what they're getting themselves into by swiping left or right on Tinder or what have you.
Right. Okay. I mean, in terms of dealing with something like this, do you think there's been a rise in false accusations?
Boy, to put a number on such a thing, I think is probably impossible to know. But I would say that there is an empowerment of the victim that is unquestionable in our current times in the last few years, such that there is frankly a enormous amount of support, and that's not always frankly warranted, of course. There are people, just as there always have been, that have reasons other than the truth to support the reasons why they accuse another person of something so vile and disturbing as a sex offense. But regardless, the one thing I would really offer to anyone listening is the fact that you cannot underestimate the power of the victim.
In what way do you mean?
Well, first of all, in the nature of the laws that have changed over the last few years, particularly in Ohio, there are laws that give the victim the opportunity to speak up in open court, even from things regarding the bond amount that has to be posted by someone who's accused of a sex crime by that alleged victim, to a voice at sentencing, which is required and has been so for a number of years now under Ohio law. And as well, the prosecution oftentimes will refuse to consider dismissal of a case, no matter how weak, as long as there is a victim who insists that the case go forward. So there are cases that literally go to trial simply because, frankly, the alleged victim, despite the evidence to the contrary, refuses to let the case go.
Okay. Now, if someone's listening to this now and you were going to help them map out a strategy to help win their case, what would you suggest to them? How would you advise them right now?
I would say first, upon the first recognition on your part that in fact this is in fact what it is. It's an accusation of a sexual nature and potentially of a criminal nature. I would see it for what it is, a potential serious, even existential threat against you, such that I would really, really recommend that you speak only to those people you absolutely positively know have only your best interests at heart. And frankly, that oftentimes is an extremely small circle of people, most important of which, of course, is a attorney.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of not talking to friends and family, why do you say that though?
Well, the concern is that oftentimes people can be accused of having victimized someone who may be a family friend, may be known to other members of the family that you would be speaking to, and quite frankly, members of the family that you think you're kind of airing this out with may ultimately be called by the prosecution to testify as to what you said to them. It is not privileged communications to tell your mother or your brother or your cousin about the accusations made against you and whether they are true or not, or the evidence for or against those accusations. So all of that is fair game in a prosecution, and one should handle that kind of information accordingly, extremely close to the vest.
Okay, and in terms of when you're working on a case, obviously you talked to me about this before the show about transparency and not wanting any surprises, right?
Well, the idea that you would somehow, as a client of an attorney who's doing their best to protect you on every level, not give that attorney every bit of critical information. And I understand, of course, that it's not always obvious what might be critical and what might be essential to know. But to share everything you possibly can in your transparent effort to just lay everything bare with that attorney. In doing so, you give the attorney the very best chance not to have a surprise dropped on him or her when representing the client, and more importantly, to position the case properly for possible resolution or for possible presentation by way of filings in court or arguments in court.
Now, I know what you've just said obviously is great advice, but still for a lot of people, they find it maybe some things extremely embarrassing to mention. But what would you say to that? It's most how would you?
I couldn't recommend more. Respond to your natural gut instinct, which is hopefully with embarrassment to keep it to yourself, and to choose to speak only to those people that you know have your best interests at heart. Obviously, most essential of all things would be to seek out an expert in the field, an attorney with typically years of experience in this field of sex crimes defense, someone who is going to take the time, not judge you on any level, but simply listen to what you have to say, listen to the facts and circumstances of the accusations, and begin to map out a defense, and to which you can be as direct as possible at all times with.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, and just to sort of wrap up, as we say, because it's 5-minute legal insights, what kind of story could you give as an example where somebody has been wrongly accused and would have suffered a pretty bad fate unless they'd had that kind of advice?
I would say I can think of a medical student I represented some time ago who was accused by another medical student, so also a very credible person, of allegedly having committed a rape against her. But upon his trusting me, Ultimately, I was able to present a case to the prosecution such that they were not committed ultimately and did not believe that charges should be brought against this young man. And he was never charged with the offense of rape or any other sex offense whatsoever.
Okay, so in some cases, it's possible not to even have charges brought upon an accusation if things are dealt with in the right way.
Absolutely. And the sooner one addresses the issues, the better. Unquestionably, the sooner you handle this, just like any medical issue, the better off you are and more likely to have greater success.
All right. Well, look, there you have it, folks. If you just want to deal with this, I think some of the advice you've received in the last few minutes should be invaluable. If you'd like to contact Ed in the future, all his details will be on the podcast. So, yeah, they'll all be there for you. So, Ed, I'd just like to thank you for today. I really appreciate you being with us, and hopefully we'll have you back on the show soon.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks for joining us in this episode of 5-Minute Legal Insights. If you'd like to contact our featured guest, just check the highlights on their episode page at www.legalinsightspodcast.com, and you'll find their phone number, email, as well as their website. Oh, and if you're a lawyer with something to say, then just get in touch. 5-Minute Legal Insights, helping people get clear on their legal issue in minutes. The views expressed by the participants are their own and are not endorsed by 5-Minute Legal Insights. Nothing said in this podcast is legal advice for you.